So this week, we're going to be talking about the root touch-up service. Amanda and I are going to be going into detail on what makes a successful color service, what to look for, and some troubleshooting. So Amanda, do you want to go ahead and get started with talking about what your idea of a successful color service is?
Yeah, my idea of a successful color service is definitely making sure there's like complete open communication from start to finish. And I like to utilize photos just so that I know that we are on the exact same page and that the color comes out as close to their inspiration pictures as possible. So for me, that's having like a very thorough consultation, kind of taking my time when it comes to formulation, really take into consideration how long I want certain things to sit on the hair when applying. And then, taking into consideration to the haircut, because sometimes a haircut can really change the way a color sits or looks. So taking all of those things into consideration, I think makes for the best color service.
Now, there's going to be a couple of reasons why you use hair color, and that's going to be one, to deposit color to make the hair darker. It's also to cover gray or to lighten the hair without the use of lightener or bleach. So those are primarily the main reasons why color is used inside of the salon. So when it comes to depositing color, we always want to make sure that we are really utilizing and really following your manufacturer's directions. All hair color works the same. I just want to say that. Every single hair color does the same thing. It lifts and it deposits. But each color line has its own personality. And by personality, I mean, some color lines you can use 10 volume to cover gray. Some color lines you need 20 volume to cover gray. Some color lines run warm. Some color lines run cool. So understanding your color line's personality is going to help you with a successful color service. Also, reading the manufacturer's directions. What are the directions that are suggested by the actual color line that you're using? Every single color manufacturer is going to have different instructions. So really going through and looking at your color book, because a lot of your color books will have those instructions ready and right there for you and available for you to actually have for your color service and the process. So I think that is something that's really important. So when we are lifting color, we always want to take into consideration the color wheel. So when we're lifting hair color, we're exposing underlying pigment, which is usually it's always warm. So depending on how you're lifting is going to depend on what color you use to cancel out the warm tones. We're either going to enhance warm tones, cancel them out, or neutralize them. Amanda, do you want to add to what I've already said so far?
Yeah, I think understanding the color wheel is definitely super important. And knowing color theory in general, so that you know exactly what tones to utilize when trying to cancel something or to enhance something. That's something that we go over a lot in the salon, is just knowing too when you're lifting, like what tones are going to be exposed, like knowing if it's going to be more of a red versus a yellow, just so that again you can utilize the color wheel properly when it comes to whatever you're deciding to do, if you want to neutralize or enhance it. Yeah.
We always have to understand too, when we're covering gray, there are going to be some color lines that you have to add a neutral into your formula. And there are some color lines that you do not have to do that. So understanding that as well. So for example, say your client is 25% gray. If your color line needs to be, if you need to add neutral into your color or your formula, then 25% of your formula has to be neutral. So if you have somebody who is 50% gray, it's the same. 50% of your formula should be a neutral. So understanding that as well, and knowing what color line you're using and what the recommendations are for that. Amanda, do you want to go into formulation and how you formulate behind the chair? Because I think this is the number one thing that so many stylists struggle with is formulating hair color and knowing what to use on their clients.
Yeah, so when I'm formulating, I really do rely on the color wheel so heavily, and I don't think I've done that throughout my entire career. But like so I was trained on one color line. I was trained through Aveda, which is like super customizable, and it is very color wheel orientated. So changing color lines for me was really hard at first. But as long as you just remember the color wheel, and I mean, it's going to be the same color. The color wheel is always going to be the same. So like, as long as you go back to thinking that way, I feel like it's easy to adapt to any color line. So I always think when I'm formulating, first I look at their natural level. I analyze if there's any grays and how much. And then I think about like where we're going to go. As far as like inspiration pictures they've showed us. And then I think about like, you know, if I'm lifting it, how much warmth is going to be exposed, how much of that I want to keep, how much I don't. So then I will, you know, go into canceling that. Or if we're just depositing and we're going to go darker, I also try to keep into consideration, like how dark would be like too dark, like, and you know, their, the integrity of their hair, because if somebody has very porous ends and you put like a really dark color all over, their ends might grab that more, which will make the ends of the hair look darker than the top. That's also kind of, I know I said a little bit earlier on how I like decide how long I want things to sit. So if someone's going to go darker all over and they do have porous ends, I might put the touch up on, comb it through, go remix another shade. Sometimes it's a shade lighter. Sometimes it just is a lower developer. And then I'll put that on the ends of the hair, but don't let it sit as long as the top. So taking things like that, like really into consideration, I think those details often get overlooked, which can make, you know, your colors like things go wrong and you don't overly know what happened. It's always just like taking those things into consideration right in the beginning of the service.
There's a common thing for everything that we teach inside of this program, and it is details matter. Putting thoughts and actual like logic behind what we're doing is so important. And it's the tiny details that are going to make an amazing service. So like Amanda said, if you know somebody has porous ends and that their hair might absorb that color in a different way, you can definitely mix a lighter shade. I always go one shade lighter. And again, don't let it sit on for as long. But I'm going to actually show the color wheel here so we can talk about this so people understand and have a visual. So here's a picture of a color wheel. When we're looking at this color wheel here, these are going to be your underlying pigments, right? So we've got yellow, orange, we've got orange, we have, you know, like closer to a red orange, and then we have a red. So all of these colors are going to exist in the person's natural hair color. The darker the hair color, the more red you're going to have, the more orange tones you're going to have, right? Because we have to break through all those. Now, if you have somebody who is like a level 7 or higher, then we're going to be kind of in this zone here, right? When we're looking at our color wheel, opposites cancel out your tones. So if you have somebody, for example, say we are, you know, toning a blonde and they are very yellow, you're going to need to use a violet undertoned hair color, right? If you have somebody who is, let's just say, because this is like underlying pigment of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So when we're thinking about that, straight across is how we're going to mix. This is why it's so important to understand your color line. If you only have one way to cancel out warm tones, which is an ash, what is the underlying tone of that ash? Because there is going to be green undertones, there's going to be blue undertones, there's going to be gray undertones. All of these things exist inside of the hair color. So if you don't have the right option to cancel out underlying pigments, then hair color might not be the best result to lift the hair. You might have to go to bleach or use your lightener and then tone that way, right? So we can still utilize our lightener to get a lighter tone, right? We just don't let the lightener sit on as long, and we bring the lightener to the actual tone that we need. And then we go in with our toners to cancel out those underlying pigments. You're going to have a little bit more of I think, an easier time with color, especially if you're just touching up their root. I feel like it's an easier process, but we have to understand our color line and the personality of our color line. So obviously orange, blue cancels out orange, so we're looking across the color wheel. This is more of like a blue violet because this has orange and yellow in it. When we're looking at our reds, that's going to be green. So your green is going to cancel out your red tones, right? That's going to give you a neutral base. Now we have to understand too, with hair color, we want to make sure hair color can take up to 24 to 48 hours for that cuticle to completely close down. You do not want your clients washing their hair for at least 48 hours after a color service, because the cuticle isn't completely closed and it can disrupt the longevity or the tone of the color immediately after the color service. There are lots of products that will stop oxidation immediately. So you've got your Deox by Malibu, highly recommend. That's something that you just put over the hair to completely stop the process. There are lots of shampoos and conditioners available. Wella has a post care, which is like a treatment that works beautifully. I highly recommend, again, using those products because those are details that you're adding into the service to help the service along. Now, when we talk about our volume of developers, your volumes, again, are going to vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Again, I said some color lines, you can get coverage for gray with 10 volume. You get 1 level of lift. And then you get 2 levels of lift with your 20, 3 levels of lift with your 30, 4 levels of lift with your 40. You have to understand that each level of developer is going to be a different processing time. If you are using 40 volume, you need to add 15 minutes onto the volume. So that's 55 minutes of processing time. And it's usually like that for every single volume. So 10 volume is usually 25, 20 volume is usually 35, 40 volume is usually 55. So you add 15 and that'll give you your processing time. Do not cut this part of the service. If you need to let your client sit for the full processing time, it's going to take a long time to open up that cuticle. If you're lifting hair color, to pull out the underlying pigments, and then to deposit, and then to close the cuticle. The higher developer, the longer the process is going to be for that to happen. So when we're taking down the color early, we're either stopping the deposit of the color or the closing of the cuticle early. So you really need to make sure that you are utilizing your processing time in a way that is effective to get the best result for the color. Amanda, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. Letting it sit on the whole time is so important too, because a lot of the times people are kind of in a rush to take it off sooner, which, for a lot of touch-up clients, I feel like a lot of my touch-up clients in particular are gray. And if you take that off early, it's going to be translucent looking on the gray hairs, which they're going to notice that something is off. And it's not going to be full coverage. And then two, just keeping in mind, like Patty said, about what developer you're using. Because if you're using, like she said, 40 volume and you don't let it sit on that full 55 minutes, it's not going to lift to its full potential, which again is kind of just like wasting time or wasting product, because you're going to have to go in and redo it if you don't let it sit on long enough.
So we have to remember too, sometimes gray hair has a double cuticle. So we notice that sometimes gray has a different texture, and that's because it can have a double cuticle. So there are a couple things that can happen when it comes to actually depositing on gray hair. We're going to go over some troubleshooting. One, the color doesn't take and it looks translucent, like Amanda said. And that is usually because one, you didn't let it sit on long enough. Two, you didn't use the proper developer to deposit correctly on the hair, or you didn't formulate properly. Those are going to be your primary reasons why it didn't turn out. So if you have somebody that comes in and you use 20 volume on them and it still looks a little translucent, sometimes you need that extra developer, like maybe like a little bit of 30 volume in there to just kind of open that cuticle a little bit more to get the result that you want. So we really need to make sure that we're looking at the texture of the hair too. It's not just looking at the color overall. One thing else that I think is important too is looking at the hair, because you can over deposit on the root too. So if somebody has really fine, kind of like wispy hair, and you match them up and it looks like a level 5 would be right for them, but they have a finer strand, sometimes that finer strand can over deposit. And that's because when we think about the strands of hair, right? So this is going to be your coarse, you're going to have your medium, and you're going to have your fine. Hair molecules in fine hair, let's say we shove 50 molecules in there, it's going to look a lot deeper, right? Because 50 molecules in this tiny amount is going to be much more predominant than 50 color molecules in somebody who has coarse hair, right? Because the molecules will fit in there a little bit better. So if you have somebody who has really, really fine hair and they match up, because your swatch book is going to be your best friend for color matching. It just is. If you notice that a 5 is perfect, but they're very fine, then you might want to start with a 6 or mix a 5 and a 6 together. And that's going to make sure that you don't over deposit. Over deposit of color is much more difficult to fix than under depositing color. If we under deposit color on somebody, that's as simple as doing a root smudge with our toner, like our Redken Shades or our Demi. We can fix that at the shampoo bowl. Over depositing color sometimes can be fixed, which would be more so like using like a Malibu treatment, or Malibu does have a quick fix, it's called, which will kind of pull out some of that over deposit. But most of the time you have to lighten the hair to get it lighter. So we really need to make sure, one, that we are formulating properly. We're looking at all of the things that have to do with the hair, right? The density, the texture, the porosity, all of these things are going to matter. But also we have to understand that accidents happen, mistakes happen. It's knowing how to fix our mistakes and not letting the client leave the salon until the mistake is fixed. That's going to be it's just going to be a lifesaver for you and your career. Amanda, what are some tricks that you have when it comes to formulating for gray and when it comes to troubleshooting?
So another thing that I wanted to touch on while we're talking about texture is I feel like sometimes with my like really coarse or very wiry gray haired clients, I feel like sometimes in the beginning of like them being my client, I would notice like hairs around their face not overly covering. And I figured out that it's because that hair is so wiry that it just like pops up after a few minutes of the color being on. So it's not necessarily being as coated as the rest. One of my favorite tricks for that is if I know somebody is very wiry or very coarse around the hairline, I will use either perm papers or foil and just like put the color on and then stick the paper, the foil right to it, because it helps those really wiry hairs lay back down and make sure that they're completely coated and covered the entire time so that the color will take to them. Another thing too that we didn't really touch on, but when I feel like you're not covering the way you should, is a lot of people in between touch-ups will use like those at-home sprays just to get them through. Like they have work that day, so they put some spray like on their roots, and then they normally don't say, they forget to mention it when they get to the salon. So when you're putting color over it, it's hard for the color sometimes to eat through all of that product that's on their roots. So sometimes I ask, sometimes you can feel it in there, you can kind of see it. So I always ask, like, do you have anything on your hair right now? And if they mention that they have one of those, I always go in with like a wet towel and see if I can remove it that way. And if I can't, I shampoo them first, because the color just isn't going to always be able to eat through all of that. When it does come to formulating grays, though, I kind of stick to the rule of thumb about, you know, if they're 50% gray, adding a 50% neutral into your formula. That's always worked for me. And taking into consideration too, if they're completely white. So I feel like clients that are completely white, they deposit darker, and sometimes it's harder to deposit the color in general, depending on how stubborn those grays are. I know that there's, you know, other products like gray oxidizing drops and stuff that can be utilized, which for some people are kind of a necessity and very helpful. But yeah, making sure that you are able to kind of figure out exactly their gray percentage is key to formulating grays.
I also want to touch base on the people who have really fine hair around their hairline. And the problem with that is over deposit, and they look darker at their, like the fronts and on the sides compared to the rest of the hair. So when we are doing our consultation, we are assessing all of these things, right? We're not just like slapping color on the head. Do they have wiry hairs or more stubborn hairs here? Do they have really fine hairs that are going to absorb the color quickly? Now, this is going to determine the way you apply the hair color, right? Where are you going to apply it first? So for me personally, like I am very fast at applying color, and you need to be quick too. The color is oxidizing in the bowl. The longer the color sits in the bowl, the less potential it has to get the result you want on the client's head, right? So with touch-ups, you need to be fast and efficient. So I would say no more than 15 minutes for your application. If you are taking longer than 15 minutes, your hair color isn't going to work. It's just not going to work the same. It's not going to have the same deposit because it's already activated in the bowl. This is why you want to wait until the very, very last minute to mix your color. We don't want to mix the color and let it sit on the cart because it's processing, right? So mixing it at your station when it's going on the client's head is the way to go about it, to make sure that the potency of the color is true to the actual color itself, right? So when we're looking at deposit only, for me, if I'm using a demi, I always start in the back and then work my way to the front, and I comb everything away from the face. And this is a clean and easy application for my clients. This takes me less than 10 minutes. So the processing is going to be even, it's going to be efficient. For my gray coverage, I always start on the top where they part their hair, because that's when you're going to have the best coverage. And that's what we want, right? If we're formulating properly. And then I'll assess if I'm going to do the hairline with the application that way, or if I'm going to wait to the end if they've got fine hair, because I don't want over deposits. So really making sure that we're looking at and examining and really putting thought and logic into what we're doing for every single person is really important. And once we figure this out, we're going to take notes on every single client, where or how we applied, any like tips and tricks to get even coverage. Sometimes you might even have to mix up different formulas for the head. You might have somebody who has, you know, no gray in the back, they're 100% natural, and they're like 50% gray on the top. Sometimes that takes two different formulas, right? So if we're, doing like, say like a level 7 and we're just depositing 7, but if we put that 7 on the back, that's going to be orange. We need to have two formulas so the color looks even. So these are all things that we need to assess during the actual service, and then taking notes so that we're consistent for the entire duration of the client's experience while they're in our salon. Now, when it comes to color touch-ups, not everyone loves to do them, but this is definitely like your bread and butter. These are your clients. They're gonna be loyal to you. They're going to like come to you every 4 to 6 weeks. And they're clients that are consistent, right? So that's what we want, is consistent clients. And these are usually the clients that you build the best relationships with. Like, I know my clients, like I jacked up my prices because I wanted to focus on extensions. And I still have my touch-up clients because they trust me. We've built a relationship, and they still come to me for, you know, the elevated price point because their hair is that important to them. So I wouldn't throw this service off to the side for your gray touch-ups. But I definitely think it's something that has to be mastered, and it's something that you have to put a lot of thought into. Amanda, do you want to touch base on your clients? Because I know you have a lot of clients who do gray touch-ups.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. I like how you talked about like consistency. These people are super consistent, they're super loyal, and you do build that relationship with them, especially early on, because of how consistent and how often they do come into the salon. In my experience, too, these are the clients that you're going to get the most referrals from, because you do have that relationship. They talk about you to people in their everyday lives. They say like, oh, I'm going to the salon today. Oh, I think Amanda is so great. Like, they'll say things like that. And I feel like that's where I get a lot of my referrals from. Even if it's, you know, them bringing in their daughter or something like that. I have really built, when I was first starting off, especially, I kind of built my clientele off touch-up clients. And although it seems like it can become, you know, routine and easy, I think that's something important too, is even though they are in every 4 weeks, I always, always, always ask, how was the color last time? Are you still liking what we're doing? Because I read something somewhere that said a client is more prone to like kind of leave if they don't like what's going on versus saying something. Like they feel awkward addressing that, you know, I don't really like how my hair is looking anymore. So I think it's important to ask those questions every time. Like, do you still feel good about the tones? Like, is this still a nice shade for you? You know, with summer coming, were you thinking of going lighter? Did you want to add some dimension? Do you feel like it's becoming flat? Asking all of those questions to me is always super important for retaining those clients.
Yeah. And another reason why clients leave is because they feel like the experience has lessened over time. And that's kind of what happens when we start building relationships with people. We kind of take that salon experience for granted because they've been coming to us for so long. So never losing the professionalism, never losing that, like Amanda said, the consultation to check in to see how their hair is doing, and never assume that we're going to do the same thing at every appointment, because they might want something different, and then you mix up and start, and then they didn't have the opportunity to tell you. So really making sure that we are taking care of those clients as best as possible. And you know, I have a lot of my extension clients who come in every 4 weeks for a move up and a touch up because they want their hair to look fresh all the time. So it's like, there's other things that you can add on to the service that can, you know, really make the client a longer appointment client, which fills your book up much more quickly. And then of course, making suggestions, like, what do you think would look good on this person? Like, if someone's just coming in for a touch up and you're like, wow, they could really use a face framing like balayage piece, or like maybe just some like painted lightened pieces to just give them some soft dimension. Maybe they just need like a low light or something. Make those suggestions to them, because adding on services to clients that are already in our books is a great way to generate and grow your revenue. And it also makes them feel important, because they're like, oh, wow, they really thought about my hair. Oh, you know, I really value this person's opinion. Obviously, that's why I'm sitting in their chair. Maybe I should do low lights. Maybe I should do highlights. And if you just drop the little thoughts, then they can think about it. You know, I was thinking about you and I really thought some balayage pieces around your face would be great. If you want to do that today, I totally have time. If not, take some time to think about it, but maybe we could do that at your next appointment. So really making sure that we are like thinking about these people and we're trying to enhance what they currently have and trying to enhance their experience. Amanda, let's talk about hot root, because I think that's another thing. This is really something that happens with reds. It can happen with blondes. It can happen with all colors. What is your solution to not get hot root, and what is your solution to fix it?
My first solution with hot root is, you know, that's when you really need to decide if you need to utilize two separate formulas, because I've seen it, it's happened to me. where you think you can just kind of use the same formula for the whole head and you put it on the roots and then you just pull it through the ends. But the roots have sat for so long and the heat from your head is making it process. It happens more with blondes and reds because you're lifting more to deposit or to expose those warm colors. So yeah, making sure if you need to utilize two separate formulas, if it happens and it's there, I kind of always treat it like under depositing color because it can be fixed at, you know, the shampoo bowl, or if you have to bring them back over to the chair really quickly, and you can kind of just reformulate something that's like deposit only and apply that over the hot rooted area to kind of even everything out. So it's not so, you know, warm or bright at the root. You want it to stay consistent all throughout. I think another thing to really keep into consideration when trying to avoid hot roots is knowing their hair history. I think that's something that too can be overlooked sometimes. If they have layers and layers of color on their hair, obviously from here down isn't going to lift the same as the new growth on the roots, especially with the heat from their head. I think all those things together are the perfect combination for hot roots. So making sure, again, that you're asking the right questions and making sure that you're formulating properly.
I think another thing that's really, really important too, and this is something I want to touch base on, is in every single state in the United States, a patch test is required for color services. When somebody has an allergic reaction to a color service, it's usually from the PPD in the color service. That's the primary cause for allergic reactions, but it can be an allergy to ammonia. It can be an allergy to, you know, maybe some ingredients if you're using a more natural or organic line. Patch tests are required. And I cannot stress enough, like you do not want to put somebody in the hospital. This actually happened to one of my friends. Somebody had an allergic reaction to hair color inside of her salon. It can be fatal, right? Their whole face swells, like it's gnarly. So if you are not going to do a patch test, and I'm going to say this for any salon owners that are on here and stylists, you need to have them sign a release form. It needs to be in your documents that they are opting out for a patch test. You need to ask them if they have any allergies or have had any allergies in the past to color. And you need to look at your color line and you need to see what ingredients are in there, especially if it's more natural, because botanicals and essential oils, all of these things, a lot of people can have allergies too. So understanding your color line in a dynamic way is very important to make sure that you aren't causing harm to somebody. Okay. And incorporating that into your consultation. You do not want to get sued. People will sue you, and it's very, very scary. So it's a part of being a professional. So making sure that if we are treating this like a career, and if we are really going to do hair services, that we are staying on top of every single little detail inside of the hair service, which is also client safety. Okay. If you have somebody that doesn't know that they, you know, have any allergies or has never had color before, then have them come in for a patch test. Okay, because that's something that we don't want to find out after the color's already sitting on their head. A lot of, you know, people will know if they're allergic, like some people are allergic to lightener, so the lightener can't touch their scalp, right? That has to stay in a foil. Like most people will know, but I'm just saying cover your butt, make sure that you're incorporating these into your consultation, and make sure that if the person's never had color before, that you do not do the service without a patch test. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to anything you want us to touch base on before we move on to wrapping up this session? You can put it in the chat or you can just unmute yourself, whatever you prefer. Amanda, do you want to add anything to the patch test or what we just covered?
Yeah, I like to do, like Patty said, if it's somebody that's never ever had color, but with that being said, people can develop those reactions later on anyway. So it's always something to look forward to. Every time I'm done applying color, I make sure, you know, to tell my guest, if anything starts to feel uncomfortable, like, please let me know. So keeping that in mind, That's also when too, like I would do like a strand test. I will also do a patch test just to make sure everything is going to be predicted as the service goes on. I don't want any surprises. I don't want anybody to feel pain or, you know, to have any sort of reactions. They are important. I feel like they get overlooked a lot. But I also too, I know someone who randomly developed that. She was actually a hairstylist. She went to beauty school. She did hair for years. And then randomly she became super, super allergic to hair color where it like can't even touch her hands. She'll have a reaction. So yeah, just keeping like up to date and always expecting, you know, the unexpected, I guess.
Yeah, and the allergies can happen over time, especially with prolonged exposure. So if somebody's been getting their hair colored for a very long time, the body can actually build up like a resistance to it. So it can happen later on. So again, like evaluating your client's scalp, asking them throughout the service, does everything feel okay? And then just really checking in with your clients. Again, we always like to check in with our clients 24 to 48 hours after the service. So those things are all important to a successful career and a successful retention opportunity for your guests. So all of these things that we're telling you, we're not telling you to create more work for you. We're telling you because it truly is going to build a successful career for you. And it's very hard, I think, to build if you aren't going to put in the work. It just doesn't, a career doesn't happen by accident. It just doesn't. And that's why I love doing these classes, because it's bringing awareness to all of the details that really do matter with your services. Okay, so if nobody has any questions, we're going to wrap up today's session. Amanda, do you want to add anything before we wrap up? And then we will see everyone next week for next week's session.
I think I'm good, but yeah.
You can always utilize the group to ask questions, of course, and to fill us in on your progress. And we will be seeing everyone next week. Okay.